Hi guys, today we're going to continue to graph some sine functions, but we are going to learn what it means to change the frequency of that function. So I just want to remind you guys what we did yesterday. We looked at a sine function and we saw that a sine function has the general shape of going up and down and back to the middle. So it had these 5 points. I started at its midline, or the middle of the graph, and went up to its maximum, back to the midline, the minimum, and then back to the midline again. So these 5 points, or this one shape going up and down, is what one cycle of the sine function looks like. This does continue and would continue that pattern, but for now we're just going to look at what one cycle of this is. We looked at this number in front, and we called this the amplitude, or the A value of the function. And this amplitude told us from this midline, or from the middle of the graph, I would go up 1, 2, 3 to the maximum, and I would also go down 1, 2, 3 to the minimum value. So this is a general sine function, and what we're going to do today is we labeled the x-axis. We labeled the y-axis. I know that this maximum is at 3 and the minimum is at -3, but how could I find out how long this is, or what my possible domain or length of this one cycle is? So that's what we're going to do today. So for warm up, I would like you to type in these 3 examples into your calculator, and I just want to help you guys set up your window for this. So I'm going to do the first one with you. On your y equals, if you typed in y equals sine of x, just like we did yesterday, and you have your zoom 6, your normal window, if you didn't change anything to your window, this is what our function looks like. But what I would like you guys to do is change. I only want to see a piece of this. I don't care about the negative values. I don't want to see this side. I just want to see this side and a specific piece of that side. So if we could go to our window, I first want to change my x values. So my x values go across this way on my graph. I want to change this to go from 0 to 2 pi. So I'm going to type in 2, and to get pi, it's with my caret button. So I'm going to hit second and then pi. So if I hit graph, this will change my x values. But we also determined what changes my y values, and it's the amplitude that changes that y values. So I'm going to change my y values on here also. I know my graph is only going to go up to +1 and down to -1. So I only want to see a little bit. I'm going to change this from -3 is going to be my lowest y value, or my y min, and I'm going to make +3 my highest y value. So let's look at this graph, and this should give us kind of a better idea of what this graph will look like. What I would like you guys to do is try the next 2 examples. So change this to y equals sine of 2x. Sketch what that graph looks like under the same window, and also try 5x. So pause this video, give those 2 a try, and see if you can see how that number in front of the x changes our graph. Okay, so I went ahead and did those graphs. So if we take a look, these are the 3 graphs that you would have gotten. Now remember, I called one cycle. You start at your midline, you go up to the maximum, down to the minimum, and back. So on this graph, and I'm going to label a few things, this went out to 2 pi, and my highest was at 1, and my lowest was at -1. This second graph, I still had a minimum and maximum values of -1 and +1. But if I look, here's one cycle, again going up to the max and back down to the min and back to the midline. And here's a second cycle. Oops, let me just try to use a different color so we could see it. And I did not change my x values. So this, from 0 to 2 pi, I now have 2 cycles. And in this third one, if I trace this again, I would have 1 cycle, 2 cycles, 3, 4, and 5 cycles. Again, I did not change my window, so this still is at 2 pi. My maximum is still 1. My minimum is at -1. So the only thing that changed here is our graph kind of squished together and we saw more cycles. So this number that is in front of the x is going to tell you how many cycles you're going to see from 0 on your x-axis to 2 pi on your x-axis. So on this first one, I saw 1 cycle from 0 to 2 pi. Here I saw 2 cycles from 0 to 2 pi. And here I saw 5 cycles from 0 to 2 pi. And I could be able to tell that from just looking at my equation. So let's go over a few important vocabulary terms for us. That number in front of the x is called our frequency. So I'm going to just write b here. And if I had the equation y equals a, which is our amplitude, sine of bx, this b value is the frequency. And this b value tells us the number of cycles from 0 to 2 pi. So again, just looking at this example, this was 1 and I saw 1 cycle. This was a 2 here and I saw 2 cycles. This was a 5. My b value or my frequency was 5 and I saw those 5 cycles in my graph. Now, a word that goes along with frequency is our period. What if I just wanted to see what 1 cycle was in this one, or where each one of these cycles ended, or what the length of 1 cycle is? So that is actually the definition of our period. The period is the length of 1 cycle. And this is a very important phrase that we're going to use, and we're going to use it for graphing a lot also. And this period, there's a formula to help us calculate that. So if I want to see what the length of just this 1 cycle is, if I know there's 5 in this 2 pi, I could divide by this b value and figure out how long each of them are. So that's why I have this equation, 2 pi, and I'm going to divide it by the frequency or that b value. So this is a very important formula that we are going to use for this unit. So I would just start or highlight it. And at some point, we do need to keep this formula in our memory. So let's take a look. We're going to do 2 together, and then we're going to ask you guys to do 2 on your own. So state the amplitude, period, and frequency of each. First off, we have sine functions. So my sine function I know starts at the midline, or the middle of my graph here, and I'm going to go up and down, and that's what my sine function looks like. So for all of these, we're going to have this basic sine function. But what I need you guys to do is to label my x-axis and label my y-axis, and this information is going to help you do that. Our amplitude is the number that is in front here. So my amplitude in this case is 3. What this 3 tells me is how high I'm going to go up. So 1, 2, 3. That's my maximum. And how low I'm going to go. 1, 2, 3. That's my minimum. So your amplitude helps you label your y-axis. To label your x-axis, we have to use what we did today. So our x-axis comes from this b value. So my frequency or my b value is 2. To calculate my period, I need to use this formula, 2 pi divided by that b value. So 2 pi divided by 2, which my 2's will cancel out, or in your calculator, you could do 2 divided by 2, and I end up with just pi. We do want to leave these in terms of pi, so don't put 2 pi divided by 2 into your calculator. If you do this in your calculator, just do 2 divided by 2. Never put the pi in your calculator. So what this period tells me, if we look back at our definition, that is the length of 1 cycle. So this I'm going to use to label my x-axis. This was my 1 cycle, and I'm going to label it here at the end of that cycle, pi. And that is all that we need to do for today. So let's take a look at another example. I did put range here, but I would like you guys on these 3, just cross out range. We don't need to talk about range today. It will come up at another point. Just want you to focus on amplitude, frequency, and period. So again, I have a sine function, but this has a negative in front of it. So this example, for one, is what a positive sine function looks like. A negative in front, I know it flips over the x-axis. So when I graph it, instead of going up first and making that my sine curve, it's going to flip over my x-axis, or it's going to go down first to its minimum and then up. Again, still having these 5 points. So if you'd like to kind of draw them with these 5 points on it so you know that you did it correctly, you can. So this is what our negative sine function looks like. But again, I would like you guys to label your amplitude and your period, or your x and your y axes on this, so that I can get a little more information off this graph. So this 2 again is my amplitude, and that tells me I go up to 2 and down to -2 from this midline. My frequency is my b value, so this is my frequency, which is 4. To get my period, I do 2 pi divided by this b value, so divided by 4. Now, this is where I'm saying that you could use your calculator to help you simplify this. If you don't know what 2/4 simplifies to, in your calculator, you're not going to put the pi in. You're going to go to alpha y equals, just like when we were doing the conversions between radians and degrees, and do 2/4, and I get 1/2. Okay, do not put the pi into your calculator to simplify these. So I know that this simplifies to 1/2. So I can write it as 1 pi over 2, but you don't need that pi in there. Typically, you're not going to see that if that was a multiple choice question. So if it is a 1, you don't need to write that 1 there. So what my period tells me again is my length of my 1 cycle. So this was my 1 cycle of my negative sine function, and it's going to end here in pi over 2. Okay, so what I would like you guys to do is for these next 2 examples, I would like you to try to sketch them, identifying the amplitude, frequency, and period, and then please label your x and y axes on that graph. All right, have a good one. Bye.